Namaste to all the viewers, and welcome back to another podcast in our series, The Unmaking of Hindu Civilization. This is part 3 of our presentation. So, today we shall be covering the topic of missionaries in particular and how they contrasted with the influence of Orientalists, as we outlined it in our last presentation. So, today's central thesis would be basically that first of all, the missionary project and the Orientalist project in India, they were in active competition over the same evidence base, basically. And is how we see what the whole colonial account of India is produced. So the Orientalists gave the idea of the golden age, that ancient India was a magnificent India and somehow fallen in the recent times. Whereas the missionaries who were the ones who first gave the permanent indictment that India was always degraded, even in its most ancient of times, and that there was no golden age to recover to. So these two positions, at first, it might seem contradictory, but they are also structurally, in a way, complementary because they cover the full temporal spectrum of colonial administrators themselves, as many of these Orientalists and missionaries turn out to be involved in the administration. And together they constructed the mirrors and the kind of worldviews in which the Hindu elites were about to see themselves in the coming years. So, our question for this stream is that what did the missionaries do to the Hindu self understanding? And how did they do it through knowledge production rather than just preaching? So yeah, that was my opening. Any thoughts on this, Nocturnal Patriot or Rishi or anyone else?
So, before we begin, I'll just give us a brief introduction as to how these Europeans landed up here. So, basically, as early as 1518, there was this man known as João da Silveira, who was from Portugal. So, he brought 4 ships to Chittagong. And it was from that time that the Portuguese basically started increasing their presence uh, in the lowlands of present day Bangladesh. So Chittagong, and later on they increased their presence in Saptagram in Hooghly. Those were known to be the earliest of the Portuguese settlements, and they were closely followed by French and Danish. So the Danish, as many of you are aware, the Danish came to Srirampur, the Dutch came to Chinsura or Chuchura, and the French came and built colonies in Chandanagar, present day Chandanagar. Uh, and during this time, they had because of the resistance they offered sometimes to the Mughal uh, officials that often came there. Shah Jahan kept sending officials, the most notable among them being a man known as Delawar Khan, to oust them from that area. So a sort of friction kept on, uh, it was always on between the Portuguese who were the primary settlers there, and the Mughal officials. Uh, but yeah, by the time Shah Jahan was dead and gone, the primary presence of the Portuguese was in the Hooghly area, basically Saptagram. And slowly the missionary projects began in those areas precisely. So, yeah, now I'll ask Nina to continue from here.
Yes, and there are many historical evidences pointing to the fact that towards the late end of their presence, the Portuguese essentially became raiders rather than actual converting forces, and also that is why allegedly the Sundarban was also kind of left uninhabited
Oh, yes,
because
there
of
was
them.
slave trade. There was rampant slave trade that was going on. And the local Rajas were really perturbed by this entire situation, which is why they often asked higher powers to intervene and oust the Portuguese from the area. They looted, they plundered, they picked up, I mean, they took away women
Yes.
and so on.
So yeah, that was our introduction. So we start with few from lines from David Cobbs itself, who quotes from Swami Vivekananda. He writes in a speech in Madras in much later times, almost the later half of the 19th century. Swami Vivekananda says that, let me tell you that neither we are devils, as the missionaries tell the world we are, nor are they angels, as they claim to be. The less the missionaries talk of immorality, infanticide, and the evils of the Hindu marriage system, better for them. If, foreign friends, you come with genuine sympathy to help and not to destroy, Godspeed to you. But if by abuses incessantly hurled against the head of a prostrate race in season and out of season, you mean only the triumphant assertion of the moral superiority of your own nation. Let me tell you plainly, if such a comparison be instituted with any amount of justice, the Hindu will be found ahead and shoulders above all other nations in the world as a moral race. So Vivekananda is writing this from the end of the 19th century, a full after the full force of the missionary and Anglicist projects had already been in work for almost a 60, 70-year period. He is writing in the voice that we in the stream are trying to build towards, that the Hindu civilizational response. So he is not denying the problems existing in Hindu society. So his denial here in this case is what the missionaries said the problems were, and what and the right of the missionaries to claim that from a position of supposed moral superiority. So we keep this voice in mind throughout the stream. It is where all of this is basically going. So and now setting up the analytical framework. So part two gave us a summary of the Orientalists, basically men who arrived with Enlightenment era categories and Christian providentialism to understand India and its theology in a sense. And they found in India classical civilization, which they often compared to Greece or Rome, which they could admire in it the same sense they admire Greece and Rome, while governing the supposed civilization's degraded presence. So the Golden Age and Dark Age, it presented two sides of a single colonial coin in a sense. So yeah, uh, today's stream covers a force that challenges that Orientalist project from that same colonial structure and from the same sources the Orientalists came to that conclusion, and partly even defeats the Orientalist conclusion in a sense. So so a question that comes to mind is, so why did the evangelicals then come produce the outcomes they did rather than coming to the outcomes that Orientalists did? So the difference might be in the difference in outcomes that they wanted. The Orientalists, in a sense, were at max just interested in bettering the governance system. The missionaries, their knowledge production, their activities, they were all intended for one single goal, that is conversion. And that is why, because their goal was much a relatively higher cause, you can call it, they were a lot more successful and a lot more motivated to reach there. So yeah. So a short recap of what all we discovered in the last two streams. So here's the first slide of the presentation. So uh, this Act One, you can see the slide one. It recaps what Part Two established, but from a new angle of what the Orientalist project made possible in Bengal. This basically lays the foundation for the missionary activity here. As we read David Koch, he identifies the Hastings credo in a sense as the foundational Orientalist position. That is to rule effectively. It comes in the next slide, I believe. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. To rule effectively, one must love India. To love India, one must communicate. To communicate, one must learn her languages. This was basically the foundational thesis of all Orientalist knowledge learning. It did not really go deeper than this. So it's you can't even boil it down to cultural generosity, because in the end, it is, as you can see, though it begins with the first line, to rule effectively. So it is a policy of governance, nothing more. Hastings' staunch belief was that British rule would collapse if civil servants remained culturally alien to India. So that is from where the whole project starts of uh, building the Asiatic Society, having the Bhagavad Gita translated, the whole arc of translation projects of various texts and so on. The you can say the patronage towards local languages. This was all an instrument of administration essentially, but it produces consequences that no administrator had properly predicted. For example, um, Fort William College, which was established by Wellesley in 1800, it starts off as a training center for civil servants. But of course, it becomes something far, far more important than that. David Kopp calls it the pivot of an institutional complex that actually catalyzed the Bengal Renaissance, in a sense, because the people who were hired to teach there, they were not just passive informants or just lecturers or teachers there just for the students, for the civil servants, but they actually made their own works in a sense, and they were producing scholarship at a level that was not produced before then. So, yes, this is the structure that evangelicals essentially encountered when they arrived, and uh, this was a structure that Charles Grant, as we will see ahead, was trying to redirect. Fort William College was actually already staffed at the top by evangelical chaplains that Grant had personally sent from England. That is, there is a person named David Brown who was provost there, and there is another Claudius Buchanan who was vice provost. Both were explicitly Christians, as in they were clergymen. Even so, the intellectual program of the Fort William College, it remained also still Orientalist and so on. Grant had that frustration as well that his own men who he sent to the Fort William College for this purpose, they might be getting absorbed into the culture they were supposed to be transforming. So yes, that was about the first few slides. This is also a little bit more on that. And from here, we start covering the life of Charles Grant. So, uh, Charles Grant, he has a very long arc of a life when we look at it broadly. So, initially, he arrived in very early in Bengal, that is in 1767, already when Clive was around, actually. So, I think maybe Clive was gone, but yeah, it was very early in Bengal still. He came as a small, I think he was commercial resident at Malda first, and he was actually witness to the 1770 famine. Some of the most descriptive accounts of the famine, exactly how bad it was, were given by him. In fact, um, he also saw through the suffering in his own life as well. He had a lot of trouble with personal fortunes. He had been gambling, been a drinker, and so on. And somewhere in his life, he has this baptism moment uh, around those years only after the famine, where he suddenly becomes more Christian oriented, and that also happens in the Danish colony of Shirampur, long before Shirampur was actually instituted as an institution, but he was converted back there in a sense. So yeah, but he sees all this suffering around him and his own life and everything. So that all that suffering he sees, But in a sense, his kind of conclusion turns out that all these are rooted in Hinduism, the suffering of the people, the Hindus, or even the East India Company as the agent or the administrator of the Hindu is in the fault of the Hindu religion. So in around 1792, he writes an actual document called the Observation on the State of Hindu Society. It's a long title as well. So this is a first and foremost a political document which is addressed to the company and to the parliament. It is a complete diagnosis and a prescription for the governance of India. So a lot of various kind of things are written in this. For example, so there was this common argument among the early Orientalists that Hindus are different the way they are because India is a very hot country. He refutes that. And someone else might say that it might be the Hindus' race being different that causes them to be so. Grant explicitly argues against both. He says that no, neither of them are the cause. The actual cause for their problems is their religion. Specifically, he named it Brahmanism. He calls it an instituted system of fraud and oppression, which produces moral degradation as its natural result. And because the cause is cultural rather than natural, he believes it is in principle curable. That if you change the religion, you cure the degradation in a sense. This makes them. So this was a slide where I wrote this down. Essentially, his bogeyman in this sense was Brahmanism, as he saw it, which was the problem in Hindu society, Indian society in general. So his descriptions become interesting then, though. So he believes that the solvent, which would dissolve Hindus' epistemology and the worldview of Hindus, in a sense, and replace them with a, you can say, a better moral system. He believed that that would be English medium education. I will quote him briefly. He writes, "The English language is a key which will open to them a new world of new ideas and will silently undermine and at length subvert the fabric of error." So basically, he writes everything that we believe Macaulay had written in 1835 in 1792. So he has already foreseen that aspect of an argument many years earlier. So going back to David Koff's uh, position on this, he believes that Grant and Wellesley had structurally opposite positions, basically. That one side, Wellesley, that's the administrator, who was a governor general, he accepted the Hastings model. That was acculturation, accommodation, working within existing institutions. Grant believed that accommodation was not respect, but it was complicity in the problems in the institutions that cause problems, the existingly. So Koch states it quite precisely that I'll quote him. Both men agreed on the necessity for a highly trained civil service elite relating intimately with the people of India. Wellesley placed himself squarely in the Hastings Joan tradition by sponsoring an Orientalist kind of approach that stressed culturation. Charles Grant, an avowed evangelical, such cultural relativity or pluralism is alien and distasteful. So yeah. So what Grant's institutional maneuver is the part most accounts miss. So when Fort Wellesley proposed Fort William College, Grant used the controversy that college generated to create a rival college in England itself, which is called Haileybury College. He wanted a sort of, you can say, foot in the system that the evangelicals could use in whatever manner possible. So yeah, he had a he tried to create an alternate college in England, which was successful in the end. uh, which also would have the concern for religion and morality according to their wishes and so on, with the full attachment to the principles of the Christian faith. So he was ensuring that the civil servants are, you can say, theologically conditioned before they even arrived in India. So they could not be Orientalized by the Fort William College training in later ages. At the same time, he also had his men sitting in Fort William College, as I mentioned earlier, Claudius Buchanan and David Brown. So at every level of the system, there was a kind of evangelical contact in the East India Company system. So yeah, uh, going ahead. So there was in 1793 this book in 1792, which was written by Grant. It was basically about introducing a pious clause. So what was this pious clause about? The pious clause was about that we must the among the objectives of the East India Company outlined by, you can say, the English Parliament or English House of Lords was, it should be that East India Company should work on improving the morals of the natives of India. That was a brief summary of it. So the reason why it actually failed was interesting. So I have a screenshot of this as well. I can probably share my screen. Just a moment.
In the meantime, we would request the audience to subscribe and share our content. It helps a lot.
Is it visible?
Yeah, clearly visible.
Yes.
You might
So
need to
this is
zoom
from
it a bit if
Grant.
possible. Just zoom it a bit.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, now it's legible.
So yes, this is from Grant's own the 1792 publication. So he mentions here explicitly. This is not his concern. He's quoting basically an East India Company official. Put in its strongest and amplest terms, it may be thus expressed: if the English language, if the English opinions and improvements are introduced into our Asiatic possessions, into Bengal, for instance, if Christianity, especially, is established in that quarter, together with these changes, many Englishmen colonized there, will not the people learn to desire English liberty and the English form of government, share of the legislation of their own country, and commissions in the army maintained in that country? Will not the army thence become in time wholly provincial, officered by natives of India without commitment to the sovereign state? Will not the people at length come to think it is a hardship to be subject and to pay tribute to a foreign country? And finally, will they not cast off that subjection and assert their independence? So yeah, that was a kind of foreshadowing that English education does bring a sort of, you can say, a love for liberty or nationalism in a sense. The particular reason they brought this up is because, as you know, before 1793, just a few years before, there was American independence, where they also taught the similar principles in a sense, and they had basically thrown off their yoke from there.
Which is surprising. So I wanted to ask you something, Ninner.
Yes.
So when Charles Grant is writing this whole text and the experiences that he's having in Bengal, wasn't that the time when we also had that whole sannyasi rebellion as well, when Britishers were being attacked by bands of sannyasins altogether? Was there some sort of
Yes.
contribution from that
In
experience as well in his mind?
Yes, in fact, there is. He actually writes it in his own memoirs that the sannyasis, when they came down from north of Bengal to south of Bengal in their raids, they had attacked his own factory in Malda. And of course, you can imagine the usual culprit in this whole ordeal would turn out to be Hinduism or Brahmanism. that is at fault.
And what's not
They
surprising here is just look at the manner in which he dismisses the fears of his opponents. He says that although English education tries to indoctrinate people with the spirit of liberty and all, it is not to be caught from a written description of it by distant and feeble Asiatics. So not only does he have this premise that uh, the natives, by virtue of their religion, are fallen and debased, but he also assumes that they are distant and feeble, so very distant and feeble that they will not be able to, catch up this spirit of English liberty. And so there's no danger of them wanting to throw away the yoke of English education, because they
Yeah,
would rather want
in
to
the
embrace English
in the
education
coming
to come
pages,
on them.
that is
He
what he
assumes.
argues.
Yeah.
And additionally to with that, he also argues that they will be grateful for us
Yeah, so this
for
is
giving them
this
the idea of
basically
liberty.
exposes his, the extent of racism, that his lens, like the lens with which he viewed the Indians, it was a tremendously racist lens, and that
So
becomes
it's
clear.
very astonishing. It's very astonishing for me to say this because at one time, as Nainer and Patriot both are observing that how he's racist and he's dismissing the whole claim of okay, there might be some problems if liberty comes in within Indian people as well. To bolster that, I will also quote one of his points, like when he says, "We cannot avoid recognizing in the people of Indostan a race of men lamentably degenerate and base, governed by malevolent and licentious passions, and sunk in misery by their vices." Unquote. At the same time, he is also having concern for the sannyasi rebellion and all other escapades which the Indians are having against these very brave and strong set of people who have come from Britain. So I don't get this whole dichotomy that they are facing with. Is this some sort of a cope? I'm asking this
Yes, probably
both to
he
you.
assumes education will make them loyal, like permanently loyal, and will stop them from rebelling at all. That is all
Oh,
he assumes. He assumes that loyalty is the only thing they will gain from indoctrinating the masses. He's too proud to admit that nationalism can also come.
and in a way, I don't understand the exact moral framework they were looking from, because earlier in his own life, um, Charles Grant notes how around him virtually all the East India Company servants, they were completely indulgent in their wealth, their in all sorts of ways, by drinking, gambling, and everything. And he himself was such a person who spent his early days drinking and gambling. He gambled away his entire wealth at a time when I think his own family was dying from smallpox and so on.
I
He
mean, we must
later had
also
that
take into
baptism.
account.
After the baptism, he begins in this whole preachy manner.
I mean, we must also take into account the kind of notions that were prevalent back in the day. Like, we are speaking of times when Darwin had proposed his theories, and talk of
This is long
eugenics.
before Darwin. This is long before Darwin.
Oh,
So
yes, yes, true, true.
70s, seventeen
Okay, yeah,
seventies, and so
yeah.
on.
So that
So
means
much more what?
things were worse before Darwin,
Yeah,
because we do know that these are times when people believe that flies are born from rotting flesh and so on. I mean, in places in Europe. So yeah,
yeah.
they had
We do
certain.
see that the best people they used to quote on maybe Laplace. I have seen a reference to Laplace there, or there was I think Herschel. He is also referred to a couple of
Okay.
times,
Okay. Yeah, and even like, I mean, we are speaking of
or
times when
Newton.
treatments were quite primitive. They used bloodletting and other kinds of therapies. So yeah, all that was there. We are
Yep,
speaking
pretty
of
much.
actually dark times. I mean, they came and regarded India as a dark continent, much like how they viewed Africa. But if you take a look into the kind of beliefs they themselves subscribe to, an entirely different picture emerges.
Yes, so I'll continue from here. So, yes, that was the basically the logic behind this whole 1793 pious clause failing. Essentially, what happened in the end was that for another 20 years, the East India Company Charter remains so, and missionaries are not allowed. That is, quote unquote, moral improvement is not allowed directly, though it did happen in a more subtle form. So, yes. Next, we move on briefly to the subject of the um, of Shirampur and the whole institution there. So uh, this there's a whole long story behind how this happens as well. So the Danish settlement at Frederiksnogar, that was also not accidental. Why exactly they chose it? That is because Carey had arrived without any passport of any form or any such, and he had to go there. And of course, missionary activities was not allowed in British soil explicitly in a legal sense. So he had to obviously work from Danish soil, but he also at the same time is an indigo farmer on British land, which does suggest that British were kind of passively overlooking his activities and so on. So among the most intellectually honest figures among the missionaries, you can probably call Carey among them. So he also around the same time as Grant, he writes a polemic, not a polemic text, or a just general assessment of the state of Asians. It's called Inquiry into the State of the Heathens, and so on, where he makes theological arguments rather than political ones. For example, he gives some quote from Matthew 28 or something, which apparently permanently binds on all Christians, which means ordinary Baptist ministers in Northamptonshire have an obligation to preach in Bengal. His idea was that since that we can even do commerce in such a long distance, we can also do missionary activity in such a long distance. The missionary activity has so commerce and missionary activity can go as parallel enterprises. Uh, just a moment, I will take a look at my notes once.
So, in the meanwhile, we'll just tell the audience that William Carey, he knew that the English company at that time weren't very favorable towards the missionaries, and hence he went to the Danish settlement in Bengal just to save his own back from the officials. Although, as Nena has pointed it out as well, that he was also, since he was a indigo planter, so maybe we can say that, at least infer that maybe there was negligence from the administration at that time.
Yeah, precisely. He was trying to escape the law, probably.
Right. So this whole thing about wait a second. Uh, I'm just searching for my points. If you guys have anything to discuss, you can discuss that.
Yes, sure. Um, so, just to harken back for people to understand how grave the situation was at that time. So, um, Carey is coming at a time when rampant mismanagement during that horrendous famine has created law and order issues across Bengal, I guess. On top of that, we have historical evidence as well because of Portuguese excursions with faith. Apparently, the Bengali mind, now I'm quoting Sri Sitaram Goel ji, he says that small wonder that in the Bengali mind at that time referring to Portuguese religion, Christianity, it was associated with savagery. Some of the missionaries by that time from the Portuguese side had also learned Bengali language and composed a few set of tracts attacking Hinduism and selling Christianity based on imaginary dialogues. In fact, so one such tract was Brahman Roman Catholic Shambad, which has a hilarious dialogue between a Brahmin and a Roman Catholic Christian. And I think this text went to Europe, and I think it was translated into many other languages as well, which is why we get a similar kind of text, but with a very different flavor from Voltaire as well, on this very same dynamic, where there is a Brahmin and there is a Padri. Both are conversing with one another. And based on Voltaire's liberal opinions, we know who he was favoring in that text.
Precisely.
But Patriot, I wanted to ask you, were there other Portuguese as well who were trying to infiltrate learning Bengali? If you could tell us more on that.
Uh, well, in present day Bangladesh, there were some Portuguese generals who had forged better alliances with certain Bengali kings. For example, you had the General Carvalho, who actually had a great camaraderie with the local king there, Kedar Rai, and actually helped fight off the threat of Mansingh, who had been sent by Jahangir. But at the same time, he was like he had locked horns with Pratapaditya. So there were Portuguese who had like they had negotiated good relations with certain Hindu kings and bad relations with others, while they were engaging in slave trade and trafficking and whatnot in other parts of Bengal. So all that was going on. So basically, when the situation is pretty chaotic, the locals become very gullible and they look for means for respite somehow. At that point of time, I guess people like uh, William Carey, uh, they came and offered much needed relief because, of course, they pretended to be very benevolent, as we know. I mean, much has been written. Like many of the
Yep.
missionaries back then, they
Yep.
pretended to be very benevolent, and they wore this
And the
mask.
East India Company was practically helpless in alleviating the famines. Charles
Precisely.
Grant, who was the political agent, not political agent, the resident there in Malta, he actually writes about how there are scores of dead bodies in the streets of Murshidabad and Malta, and they are practically helpless in not being able to do
So
nothing, anything about them.
using money and relief as as a bribe to attract converts was something that Kerry would have mastered in such a situation because there were needy people around him, people who needed some sort of relief at that point of time, and Kerry capitalized the situation because he had the money and the means to assist them.
Yes. So a little bit about the background of Carrie and their whole Baptist mission in a sense. So this has the background of actually Baptist missions in America and England as well. That they just did not emerge from a simple search of evangelical enthusiasm, but it was about something called hyper Calvinism. There was a strand of Baptist theology which had concluded that since God in his sovereignty would save the elect without human intervention, that evangelism was actually unneeded, that we are actually usurping God's prerogative. It's not the human's prerogative to convert. So, this theological paralysis have apparently made Baptists stop converting other people. So later, in like 1780s and so on, someone named Andrew Fuller, he makes the first time the argument that the it is stated in their scripture that the unconverted or or you can say infidel or whatever you want to call it, they did have a moral obligation to believe. So that does mean that the converted who are already converted, they have a moral obligation to preach to the unconverted. This is kind of really. small kind of it's kind of petty logic, but yeah, they basically then move ahead to the next logical question that if the obligation is universal, then it extends to the entire world. So yeah, this is happening simultaneously with something called the Great Awakening in American Christians who were they were creating a lot of hype, a lot of organizations about the spreading the gospel and so on. And they also believe that the end of times is near and so on, that they need to get as many converts as possible. So yeah, they believe that since time was running out before the second coming, so the unconverted soul tragedy, that would be a huge tragedy for them. So there was this whole emotional register for their project as well. This is actually referred to by Marshmen, if somewhere else, if I'm correct. And this whole project was actually quite started off in a quite humble level. Even so, Carrie kind of made it off.
Yeah, yet again, they bring up this soul harvesting topic. Missionaries are allowed to cross oceans to catch souls so that they can expand their flock, because Christians, as you might be well aware, they believe in this concept of building a flock for their, I mean, for Jesus, who is the ultimate shepherd. So the missionaries are on, like, they are engaged in these labors, in these tasks in which they try to expand this flock and gather more sheep, basically more gullible converts that they can add to the flock and impress Jesus, and thereby gain salvation.
What's
Yep.
interesting is this, also hilarious, in fact. Niner, you put out that argument, right? That there is some sort of a moral obligation even within the unconverts to believe in God. Like, they have just built their own premise altogether, it seems. Like they have to do this job. So, how to justify it? Well, let's make a random premise whatsoever.
This
Of
everything
course,
is
from their
basically
scripture.
standing on these mountains of flawed premises they have, and they have certain boxes they wish to check out. So all their activities are directed towards validating that particular goal.
Pretty much, yes.
By the way, Niner, also Patriot can contribute to this as well. So, was Carey the first guy to embark on this journey, especially within the Baptist sect of Christianity, Protestant Christianity, in such a endeavor of conversion?
When it comes to India, yes.
Okay.
And we can see the force with which they have, like, I mean, Gary emphasizes on this, that the generation has, like, it has a permanently binding obligation to preach the gospel globally, to kind of to save those who need saving, and they decide who needs saving, basically. And I mean, this actually harkens back to a very similar pattern we see, a pattern that I always like bringing up now and then. uh, Dr. David Livingstone, he went there, I mean, people believe that he went there as a physician, but that is actually not the entire story. He was a missionary. He was a missionary who went there on a soul saving expedition. So it was like he was part-time doctor and full-time missionary. And that is why Africa came to be known as the dark continent, which needed to be cured of its affliction and shown the light of Christianity. So this is basically something that most missionaries back then believed in, that the light of knowledge, the light of Christianity would save these dark parts of the world, and they were the ones who brought this light of truth to these places, the necessary illumination. You can
Pretty
see that
much,
Carey's
yes.
attitude was very similar.
So when you read his own text, that is the inquiry, you see about how his entire section is about a whole global survey. He writes a whole list of tables, and in those tables, he basically categorizes how much land area is where, how much population of which religion is where, and so on. So the
Many
whole
of us
world is
today are
basically
familiar with
ah,
the Joshua project. Do we see a similarity here with the kind of documentation that Kerry is doing?
very much so, very much so. Essentially, he is saying that the entire world is there to convert in this case,
Precisely.
and that is the basic universalist framework they start off from. So Carey himself was also he was also a Bengali, I think, lecturer at Fort William College itself.
Yes.
So, however, what is very interesting that Carey and Ward, and you can say even Shriram, they would probably fit more into the Orientalist worldview more than the Anglicist worldview. So, because as a contrast, I would like to bring the example of Alexander Duff. So Duff arrived in 1830, much later, and his aim was to basically transform Calcutta Bengalis into Scottish Presbyterians. That so he would accentuate, reduce the polarity between the East and the West. They would make them basically imitations, um, and basically uh, make them learn English language, make them learn English culture, and so on. That is the method of Christianization they believed in. Carey was the kind of opposite, that he wanted to make everything in Bengali, everything basically what they called acculturation. Everything must be done in the local uh, language, customs, and so on, with the s- power of Christianity. So that the Christianity would become the core folder of this structure in a sense. So he did not believe in dismantling the entirety of Hindu society in that sense. That was there. That was a very strange thing that takes place. But yeah, that also exists.
Yeah, so it's
Anything
like
more?
Nina, you can, yeah, so you
Hmm?
can correct me on this. At least this is my interpretation from the take that you have given. So Carey is like saying that we will get rid of the Hindu framework at the very base and we'll replace it with Christianity. But on top, there will be what they called as Hindu race customs, right? So the native
Yes,
language, the native
you wear the same
clothes,
dress.
the food,
You speak the
Yeah,
same
they hope that
idioms.
eventually the natives will give up their Hindu loyalty sooner or later.
No,
Once
no.
they have
He
corrupted the
believes
framework.
that you know, right, like how Greeks basically convert. They basically usurp the whole or useful knowledge of the earlier system. So everything useful from Hinduism is
ah,
taken over by Christianity.
True.
true, true, true. Oh God. Yeah, it's much more worse, and it seems like
Yeah.
at least Duff was on the face. This guy was lurking behind the
The
shadows.
another aspect of the contrast is that Alexander Duff was probably out there to convert the elites, whereas William Carey, he was obviously not out to convert elites explicitly. He was also converting people in the rural areas and so on. That is how
True,
they even
true.
collect their converts. That they would go for the most desperate people, the most needy people, uh, and find them in the most compromising situation, and basically make them do baptisms and so on. It's quite an awkward read when you actually go into their records.
So, like in our first presentation, you had talked about one of his assistants, right? So,
Yes,
do we
Ram
get
Ram
any
Basu.
more information? Yeah. So, like, was Ram Ram Basu the prototype of what Carey wanted in India? Could we say that?
As we had discussed, his encounter with Ram Ram Basu was kind of twofold. He was also simultaneously disappointed with Ram Ram Basu for being a sort of degenerate, so to speak, but he also appreciated him for engaging with Christian theology and everything. But yeah, I suppose he was one of their best guys.
I guess. Yeah. You can continue with the point.
Yeah. So yes, so that is essentially the same point that is being made in this slide as well. As you can see in the paradox part, that Ward in 1821, he actually defends Sirampur College on Orientalist grounds that we have carefully avoided everything which might anglicize the converts. So the polysemist, he was also the educator in this instance. That is also there.
Okay, this is interesting. Could you explain the left portion?
Just a second.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. By the way, for all the audience, you can please post your questions as well. Hashtag Q, and maybe we'll take them up as well after our discussion is complete.
Right. So before we cover that, I would also like to cover the views of the other, you can say, Shriram guys, especially William Ward. In 18 to 11, also basically part of the whole attack to change the pious clause in the upcoming, you can say, what was that? The East India Company Charter in 1813. So he writes a
Yes.
complete systematic documentation of Hinduism from the Orientalist translations. So and this is the key thing about it. He is not denying what the Orientalist writes and so on. He accepts their translations as correct, but he takes it as evidence not of past glory, but actually of indicting corruption. So he interprets them in a different manner. So that is where the next slide comes. So William Jones, he would read the Bhagavad Gita and he would find sublime philosophy in it, and so on. Ward would read the same text and he would find random inferences on about caste, about Brahmin authority, about all sorts of uh, even degradation that doesn't exist in the text. He would find it in some manner. Um, and of course, in his own thing, he also writes in a lot of ethnographic data about, say, this area they do so and so, the worships of so and so god behave so and so, and even about the area around Srirampur itself, he would allegedly see um, immolations, that is sati, happening right from the door printing press operation itself in Srirampur, that too daily, apparently. So, yeah, they use us. Essentially, this was the point which you were hinted to at in the beginning, that the Orientalists and the missionaries used the same translations, yet they came to different conclusions. So there is an exchange between this William Ward and another missionary who is a lot more Orientalist oriented. He's called Thomas Morris. He Morris describes Hindu ceremony as a beautiful and radiant cherub from heaven, whereas Ward then responds to him. If Mr. Morris think there is something in Hinduism to excite the most sublime ideas, let him come and join in the dance before the idol, or assist the Brahmins in crying hickory hole, while the fire is seizing the limbs of the young and unfortunate Hindu widow. So Ward is basically claiming empirical authority over textual romanticism. And the real irony here is that Ward has been in Shirampur or in India itself only since 1800. Thomas Morris never even came to India. He was sitting there in London itself. So yeah, any thoughts on this,
Wow.
Rishi or Nocturnal Patriot?
Yeah, it's. I mean, the allegations that he has put is diabolical, right? So he wholeheartedly accepts the whole um, ideas like what do they say? William Ward, I think he notes this, right? Krishna is Apollo, Ma Kali is equal to Artemis, and various other
Yes.
fictions which the Orientalists had created. Yeah, they did. He did that, and also what he does is then he goes whole Christian on it. So basically, like how Christians would uh, say about the Greek gods as daemons in their like their early church fathers used to say that about Greek gods. Similarly, he's taking the same set of arguments, I guess, against our Hindu deities as well now, because he has mapped them on due to Orientalist interpretations. And on top of that, now he's making claims, alleged claims of immolations right out of his door in Sirampur office. And then he'll also make many such exaggerations as well, I guess. Maybe Nainer, you can put it out, and Patriot can also contribute to it, on how daily hundreds and in month and by months thousands of women are getting immolated, and they are being forcefully killed, and so on and so forth. We see
Yes,
these sort of, yeah, please.
yes, specifically the claim by Carey and Marshman and Ward in this case was that in their neighborhood in Shirampur, there were 600 widow emulations in the past few weeks, which is obviously impossible, even accounting for the population density.
And
Indeed, indeed.
since they
And
were living in Srirampur, as many of you are aware, Srirampur has a famed Jagannath temple, the Mahesh Jagannath temple.
Yes, I wanted
So
to come to that as well, about the Jagannath temple as well. Even though
so
Puri Jagannath temple, on that subject, I would like to bring up another one of the vice provost at Fort William College who was a Christian, Claudius Buchanan, who we mentioned. He also makes an ethnographic attempt at Hindus, basically, which is called Christian Researches. He also gave a lot of sermons and that kind, because he was a clergyman, of course, which is called the particular one which I'm referring to is called Star in the East. Both of them are not just, you can say, theological assessments, but they're also political mobilization documents. So, two things in his documents that are crucial in my eyes, at least. So, first, he writes a whole account of the whole Jagannath pilgrimage and everything, and he writes that, or believes that, the company's own collector, um, who his name was James Hunter, who was actually managing and taxing the Jagannath pilgrimage in an orderly manner, and getting revenue from it. Um, he was essentially accusing him that he's tolerating idolatry in a sense, and the whole argument behind that, behind the polemics, went to the extent of saying that the company is making profits from idolatry. When this accusation went to the parliament, the East India Company was not able to defend. So that was the first one. The second one, the sermon which I mentioned, the Star in the East. It is again one of those, you can say, the those providential documents, right? Where they say, talk about how the West is in the millennial golden age in its fullest form, and that Britain is being preserved in the Napoleonic Wars, not because of the greatness of our empire, or of our dominion of our sea, or of our extended commerce, but because it is the vehicle of Christian civilization. This was from the time when Napoleon basically swept all of Europe, and Britain alone was essentially Britain and Russia, I suppose, were only independent. Everyone else was fallen under. So he believed that this was a sign from God that the British should take, and that they should start an evangelical movement based on this. So yeah, this was not exactly utilitarian or progressive or anything, but yeah, wholeheartedly Christian. This is the slide where this is mentioned. So yes, that was on Claudius Buchanan. The next slide, we talk about the Vellore mutiny. This is also an interesting event where all these arguments that were actually happening in private, you can say, rooms or conversations, or even in a sense, were staying to words. This came actually tested in theory in this mutiny. So there was a whole furor at the massacre at Vellore in 1806, which led to polarization further of the ideas between Orientalists and evangelicals concerning the best means of morally and culturally rehabilitating the Hindus. So the pamphlet war that followed was quite interesting. There are 25, 26 different writers who basically tried their own ideas on this. Probably the most important Orientalist response was from Colonel Hindu Stewart, who writes Vindication of the Hindus, which is a quite frank defense of Hindu civilization, that it argues that it needs a meliorating hand of Christianity. And what is interesting is, of course, Stewart uses Holbrook and William Jones as his sources and so on. So the argument could have gone either way. On the other side, there comes Andrew Fuller, who is also the same person who uh, gave the arguments on why evangelism should happen by the Baptists in the first place. His counter arguments were that Hindus are an immense number of particles of sand, totally incapable of cohesion. Therefore, conversion cannot destabilize British rule. So he was simultaneously denying Hindu solidarity and also justifying confident intervention. So yes, the whole result was that there were like, I think, over 800, 900 petitions written, many years of political campaigning going on. Ward's text was read. Then Claudius Buchanan's Jagannath account was actually read in the parliament there itself. And of course, Charles Grant was basically the his or text were basically the founding foundation of the missionary side and so on. And the result was as expected. It worked. They actually admitted the missionaries there. So it was so they actually admitted the missionaries, and Anglican establishment would be uh, set up there according to Claudius Buchanan's insight, and the government would use money for religion, you can say moral instruction in whatever manner it saw fit. Of course, the money did not actually end up in moral instruction, as you can expect from the East India Company. But yeah, the intent headed in that direction.
So the company put some resistance to all of this, right? So they put out arguments against
Yes,
it as well. And hmm. So this is happening in British Parliament, right? And then what's the time
correct.
period?
1813. This is a whole
Ah,
parliamentary argument. The whole Juggernaut controversy, they read it there. That is why it became so popular.
hmm. I mean, it's still
And
being continued right now.
uh, so the basic argument that was that the East India Company is making profit of idolatry because they are organizing the, you can say, the yatra.
Wow. And later they will take taxes, right? So instead of
No, no, they have
like getting,
essentially that they have that moral. You can say they are trying to show off the moral superiority that these
ah,
people are making money off the idolatry. That is wrong. They
that is
should
wrong.
remain indifferent.
Sure.
Their alleged thing is that they should remain indifferent, but implicit, of course, they want to end idolatry.
True, true, true. I mean, the kind of arguments they were giving, right? So, who was the guy who was doing this, like spearheading this whole operation in Parliament?
So there was a whole sect of these mo- uh, people called the Clapham sect, where they were being led by William Wilberforce, who were driven by whatever Charles Grant and others were writing. Claudius Buchanan was one of the more, you can say, what should I say, more prominent ones
Uh,
among them. So,
Hmm.
but interestingly, Sri Rampal was not explicitly involved in any of this
Interesting.
because one, they were operating from Danish soil, and two, they actually did not have
Oh.
at that point in time they did not have enough funds
Hmm.
to
Hmm.
influence much. Though they were
True.
running a
I
proper
mean, if
press and everything, they were pretty much in
the
debt and so on.
and Claudius Buchanan being a Fort William official, he would get much more, I think, observation from the
Claudius Buchanan was
Parliament
appointed
authorities.
directly by Charles Grant from England. So, and he was an Anglican, I think not Anglican, probably Scottish Presbyterian or something. But yeah, he
Okay.
was
Okay.
one some higher position guy,
Ah, so a clergyman. So yeah, he'll get
proper clergyman. Yes,
audience.
yes, yes.
Mm.
He was vice provost, whatever that is called.
Mm. True. Yeah. Let's move ahead. What do you wanted to say?
So moving on. So we basically move on towards the tail end of this discussion. Basically, that this is the bridge to the next part we should be talking about, and here also I'll briefly be covering David Kopp's analysis of the whole Orientalist evangelical conflict. So David Kopp, he this 1813 charter, it did not exactly resolve the whole conflict between Orientalists and evangelicals. So Kopp shows that after 1813, Marquis Hastings, who was Governor General from 1813, he mounted a vigorous counter program that he began appointing a lot of these Orientalists in a lot of prominent positions across um, the administration. He was funding a lot of printing for the local presses. He lifted the censorship of the press, which Wellesley had put years earlier. He actually supported a bit of Bengali journalism, apparently. And he was, of course, patronizing indigenous scholarship through the Fort William College. So after 1813, we have essentially three simultaneous projects competing for the Bengali intelligentsia. Basically, the evangelicals, the then that is the missionaries, the ones supporting English education, and the ones who wanting to convert. Then the high culture Orientalists, that is H. H. Wilson and Asiatic Society. And then there was a third popular culture Orientalists, that was the administrative side from mainly Marcus Hastings and so on. And all three were essentially producing quite a lot of consequences. In that, the third one, as you will see, the funds which are supposed to be allocated for the moral instruction and so on by the government, they actually went to societies such as the School Book Society in Calcutta, which was used to promote, you can say, English technical knowledge, learning, sciences, and so on in a secular fashion among Indians. So it actually went in a good hand due to the intervention of the Governor General here. So yeah, that was one aspect of it. Though at the same time, we see a lot of missionary schools begin propping up across Calcutta and the hinterland as well. So in this pressure, the Bengali elite, you can say, they become sort of culturally ambivalent. So they kind of interact and engage with pretty much everyone in their whole thing. As you can see, the in the thumbnail of our stream, we had placed a Pandit next to William Carey, who is the Englishman in our thumbnail. That Pandit's name is Mrityunjay Vidyalankar. He was actually head Pandit at the Bengali department at Fort William College, and also an assistant to helping William Carey make translations there. So not at Sri Rampur, but over there. He also basically learns the printing, you can say art or whatever, the skill. And he also sets up his own parallel press and everything later on. He also engages in a lot of public discussions in various topics, famously writing against Sati. much earlier than Ram Mohan Roy did. So yeah, this is one kind of way the Bengali elite reacted. Another manner in which the Bengali elite reacted was, I have an example of Kashi Prasad Bose here, who, having studied at a Hindu college, while at the same time where there were Derosians deriding Hindu learning, everything Hindu in the world, I suppose, he was defending Hindu polity against Mill's charge of barbarism. He was defending Hindu kings. He was defending, you can say, Hindu principles and so on. While also at the same time, the fault being that his sources, they were all mostly H.T. Colebrook and also William Jones, through the Asiatic researches and so on. So he's using British scholarship to contest a British, you can say, uh, indictment in a sense. So yeah, the this generative loop that Orientalist knowledge became the foundation that was not being broken at all. It was being uh, just continually perpetuated, that they would use the same knowledge to have their all their discussions and so on. So this is where it ends up basically, that Ram Mohan Roy is pretty much where this ambivalence it reaches its most historically significant expression. That he accepts the Orientalist golden age, that is apparent Vedantic monotheism as the true and ancient Hinduism, while he also uses evangelical critique of Brahmin corruption as a lever for internal reform. So he tries to fight Sati with apparent Shastric arguments, though his language is always, in a sense, Christian Unitarian of sorts, and so on. So, yeah, we will probably cover him in the next discussion.
Yes. In the upcoming episodes, we will discuss him in very great detail. So, audience, you're in for a very great surprise, I would say. Yeah, Patriot, any comments you have? Okay, let's finish with this. Yeah, Neil.
Yes, so at the end of this, I would like to come back to the point of Swami Vivekananda, as we started off with him itself. This is the quote we started off with in the beginning. I would like to end off with a different quote. If you give me a moment, I'll just pull it up. So yes, he writes, Swami Vivekananda says in the speech, in India, new circumstances at the same time are persistently demanding a new adjustment of social organizations. For the last three quarters of a century, India has been bubbling over with reform societies and reformers. But alas, every one of them has proved a failure. They did not know the secret. They had not learned the great lesson to be learned. In their haste, they laid all the evils in our society at the door of religion, and like the man in the story, wanted to kill the mosquito that sat on a friend's forehead. They were trying to deal such a heavy blow as they would have killed their own friend and the mosquito together. But in this case, fortunately, they only dashed themselves against immovable rocks and were crushed out of existence in the shock of recoil. Glory unto those noble and unselfish souls who have struggled and failed in their misdirected attempts. Those galvanic shocks of reformatory zeal were necessary to rouse the sleeping Leviathan, but they were entirely destructive and not constructive, and as such, they were mortal and therefore died. So, yes, uh, essentially, we see that through his own words and through as much as we have read through David Koch and so on, all these challenges that we were producing, they were in the end operating in the same framework, and they were unable to come out of the perpetuations that they started in their own sense. And by the time of Swami Vivekananda's time, it is pretty much easy to make out that they were all futile attempts. So yes, yeah, in that sense, there was nothing much to be learned to them. But we see that even now we are trying to perpetuate such movements and such radical ideas and placing the blame of it on religion itself. So this must be recognized that this is in fact the deepest form of psychological colonization, that we are not fighting the imposition of alien categories, and we are incorporating these categories into our own resistance, into what we are supposed to be. So yes, that was my whole point here.
Amazing, amazing exposition on this. And to bolster your point, there is this incident which I would like to share with audience over here. So this is from Sitaram Govilji again. He records an incident. Uh, it's a much later incident, but says a lot about the missionaries. So it's an account from Louis Roulet, a French traveler to India who wrote in 1876. In what country could such a spectacle be witnessed as that which met my eyes that day in the square of Banaras? There, at 10 paces from all that the Hindu holds the most sacred in religion, between the source of wisdom and the idol of Shiva, a Protestant missionary had taken his stand beneath a tree. Mounted on a chair, he was preaching in the Hindustani language on the Christian religion and the errors of paganism. I heard his shrill voice issuing from the depths of a formidable shirt collar eject these words at the crowd, which respectfully and attentively surrounded him. You are idolaters. That block of stone which you worship has been taken from a quarry. It is no better than the stone of my house. The reproaches called forth no murmur. The missionary was listened to immovably, but his dissertation was attended to, for every now and then one of the audience would put a question, to which the brave apostle replied as best as he could. Perhaps we should be disposed to admire the courage of the missionary if the well known toleration of the Hindus did not defraud him of all his merit. And it is this tolerance that most disheartens the missionary, one of whom said to me that day, our labors are in vain. You can never convert a man who has sufficient conviction in his own religion to listen without moving a muscle to all the attacks you can make against it. End quote. This is a brilliant exposition on the Hindu character as well against such diabolical attacks which were coming out from the Christian missionaries. For all the claims that they make of loving the other and so on and so forth, the kind of behavior that they engaged in, making exaggerated claims and also false claims as well. Time and time again, we have seen that from putting out false interpretations of texts, putting out false representations of deities, making exaggerated remarks on our Rath Yatras, like in case of Jagannath, where Buchanan makes claims such as, "Oh, uh, these first of all, the alleged huge numbers of dead people under the Rath. That's the claim that he makes, which is the most infamous one. Along with it, there
Yes,
are claims like, oh, the carvings on the temples are disgusting, and the dances are, what do they say? These dances are diabolical and so full of vice and sin and so on and
Their
so forth. They
lectures
are
and so
getting,
on. Yes, yes, yes.
yeah, their lectures and so on. Yeah, exactly. So all of these moral indignation which they put out, I do not think those are reflective of their so-called love. But I guess that's the moniker of tough love, I guess, for them. No, no, it makes me feel very weird, at least. Yeah, both of you can carry on.
Yes, so basically, in summary, if you want to understand what the missionaries were actually doing, there is nothing better than Swami Vivekananda's speech itself. So, for anyone who wants to read it, it's called A Reply to the Madras Address. So, he writes this after having come back to India from America.
True. Uh, Please, what Nina has said, please, I would request the audience to kindly look at that because it's a masterpiece, as we have seen also. Um, by the
Because
way,
it outlines,
just wanted
in a
to.
sense, that everything the missionary project was essentially doing. In just a brief few words, it outlines that they pretend to learn our systems, learn everything. They try to become the authority on what we are and pass judgments on us as well. But when Swami ji asks them, they cannot quote a proper line of Sanskrit. And they apparently have
Hmm,
read papers criticizing the Vedas and all the sacred sources of the Hindu religion. They write all sorts of myths about people throwing their babies to crocodiles in the Ganga, about you can say, not just in case of Jagannath, they believe that the Rath Yatras were happening everywhere and they were catching people on the go everywhere. All kinds of myths were being taught. And of course, he lays the blame on Christian religion, as it should be, that their religion is the one which essentially teaches us as being vile and so on. I will paste the link of the
absolutely.
book in the chat for anyone who wants to read it.
Indeed, indeed. We can look at that. Yeah. I just wanted to convey this as well because, of course, we will discuss him in our next podcast in detail. Uh, but still, I would like to share this point as well. So, Raja Ram Mohan Roy, mm, he has described the ways of the missionaries as well. Given his interactions, especially with the Sirampur trio that today Nainer has talked about, uh, he knew them quite well, in fact. So he has said a lot about the missionaries and their escapades. So he says, quote, it's from his preface to Brahminical magazine. For a period of upwards of 50 years, this country, it's Bengal he's talking about, has been in exclusive possession of the English nation, during the first 30 years of which, from their word and deed, it was universally believed that they would not interfere with the religion of the subjects, and that they truly wished every man to act in such manners according to the dictats of his own conscience. Their possessions in Hindustan and their political strength have, through the grace of God, gradually increased. But during the last 20 years, a body of English gentlemen who are called missionaries have been publicly endeavoring in several ways to convert Hindus and Muslims of this country into Christianity. The first way is that of publishing and distributing among the natives various books, large and small, reviling both religions and abusing and ridiculing the gods and saints of the former. The second way is that of standing in front of the doors of the natives or in the public roads to preach the excellency of their own religion and the debasedness of that of the others. The third way is that if any natives of low origin become Christians from the desire of gain or from any other motives, these gentlemen employ and maintain them as a necessary encouragement to others to follow their example. So I think he has rightly explained as to what kind of activities the missionaries were engaged in. By the way, Nina, you have some information, right, as to
Yes.
how William Carey used to do his shenanigans on streets.
Yes, basically their activities are, first of all, they use the press to print a lot of pamphlets. In those pamphlets, they would obviously describe our, you can say, devtas in a very crude manner and so on, and distribute them in public. Later on, they had to change that to be more less explicit and so on. The typical pamphlet would be about, you know how it is that Jesus and love and so on. Those kind of themes would be there. So yeah,
Oh,
and of course they went explicitly to certain areas like certain temples around Sri Rampur, around Calcutta. They targeted there. They also observed, or you can say, noted down a lot of practices that they believed were wrong and so on. They would deliberately exaggerate and create a lot of, you can say, rumors about these supposed bad practices happening around. For example, they would say that some kind of festival that they would talk about in Calcutta, that apparently people would throw
hmm.
their babies into the rivers, which is the same thing
Oh
that
my.
Swami Vivekananda points out. And nobody is throwing their
Yeah.
children to the crocodiles there. These are all cooked up things.
Yes, I suppose what they were referring to is the Baruni Mela. So that is basically a festival in which the Ganga River is worshipped and people throw fruits into the river, fruits and flowers into the river, uh,
Uh,
invoking the goddess and basically making offerings to the river so that the mother the goddess Ganga accepts these offerings from them. So basically, fruits and flowers get thrown, but never children. But I mean, they didn't just write this about India; they wrote this about China as well. So there are earlier accounts of China written by, I mean, and there are stories written by missionaries in which they mention that there's this odd practice in Asia, in places like India and China, where
yeah,
Wang Ho is offered, the Wang Ho River in China, that being the main river of China, is offered live babies, and a similar story was written about India and the Ganga.
basically an Orientalist fantasy.
Precisely. I mean,
Indeed.
because
And
we
also,
do find such cases of, I mean, water bodies being offered, babies, and such in European theology. I mean, in Christian theology itself, we have the case of Abraham being offered. I mean, Abraham being
yes.
told that his son be sacrificed to their God. So it was there. It was very much there
Uh-huh.
in their own theology. So it was a kind of coping mechanism for them as well.
True,
A
true.
reality they had to live with.
Also, maybe you can comment on it. Yeah, also, maybe you can comment on it. So, there is this whole story about Moloch, right? The ancient enemies of the Jews.
Oh yes, I
So,
mean they went so far as to label Jagannath as Moloch. The temple of Jagannath is a temple of Moloch where babies got sacrificed, which is an entire lie. And they even
They
constructed.
love the trope of sacrifices.
Oh
They
yes,
yeah,
initially, when they saw Sati, they believed that was also a sacrifice.
and they went so far as to suggest that the wheels of the Jagannath, of the Juggernaut, as they called it, the wheels of the Jagannath temple's chariots would go about crushing women, children, and men under it. And we are well aware that, I mean, the Rath Yatra is known to be is still known as a very benign practice in which the deities are just moved from one temple to another temple, and the god of the temple makes a public appearance the before the masses. So there's no history of the chariot ever being driven over live individuals, let alone kill them. So all these are figments of imagination that probably, uh, I mean, the missionaries probably made up these stories so they could uh, justify the this theory of labeling the natives as debased and degenerate. That would
Yes,
also let this
and
the missionary work to continue, because the missionary work necessarily ran on money. money that came from pious individuals sitting in Europe, Christians sitting in Europe, and maybe their
Exactly
colonies,
this.
America
All
and
these
Australia.
polemics, they had to be written so that people felt offended and outraged at there and sent money to the missionaries. On the same note, I would like to also point out that I didn't cover it in the stream, only just briefly, but all the, you can say, narratives on caste were essentially formed by the same people we discussed today. Uh, you can say William Carey, Charles Grant, or even going down to that other person who I forgot his name. The
Marshman.
just a second. William Ward and one more person. Just a second. So
Okay.
Thomas Morris. Yes, Thomas Morris. So he writes an entire text on this. He calls it Brahminical fraud detected because he believes that Orientalists have been frauded by the Brahmins in a sense. Why? But the strangest thing is that he also accepts the Orientalist translations somehow, which even I don't frankly understand. But yeah, the whole you can say there are two streams of this caste argument, right? So one is that Brahmins have basically corrupted the scriptures or essentially appropriated the scriptures just for themselves. That was the one stream of that. The other was from the Shriram side, which was actively profiling people based on caste everywhere they went. So when you read their ethnographies and so on, they and even their accounts, they would say that this person of so and so, you can say carpenter caste, this person so and so, fisherman caste, like this. This kind of thing was practically unheard of before. They were very, very concerned with caste in a sense. This is starting with missionaries.
And what's even more absurd is that this Morris himself had never set foot in India. So he formed all
Yes,
these opinions and furthered propaganda based on whatever he was reading. And also, another thing that is very interesting to notice that much of what uh, the West knew about India was based on these accounts by the missionaries, which were known to be biased accounts, which were known to be heavily prejudiced or deliberately colored with bias. Which is why, I mean, we even notice this. I mean, much later during Swami Vivekananda's time, Swami Vivekananda notes how people like Pandita Ramabai and others, uh, they have been coming and hoodwinking and basically deceiving gullible women in America into donating money for the missionary cause that will, you know, cure the disease of the natives. The disease being the disease of the native religion that the Hindus believed in. So there were many gullible people sitting in Europe and America who were made to believe that uh, Hinduism was somewhat something comparable to the plague, and it needed to be cured through the and like Christianity
yes.
being the drug that would bring this cure. And I mean, but there are accounts in which doctors have been known to go about saying that they have tonic for the body, which happens to be the medicine that cures ailment, and they also have tonic for the soul, which they will readily administer to the willing. And
The
there were
baptism,
people who
basically.
basically baptism. There, I mean, among the earliest converts to Christianity in India, we have the case of a man known as Surya Narayan Chakravarti. Surya Kumar Chakravarti, who had come abroad, who had gone to Europe to study medicine, and his mentor, a doctor, again, many doctors back then, as I mentioned, in case of David Livingstone, were full time preachers, full time pastors. His mentor
Yes,
convinced him to take on his mentor's religion. His mentor's name was Dr. Goodeve. So you can look him up if you want. So he readily converted and took on his mentor's religion and came to be known as Surya Kumar Gudiv Chakravarti. And he settles up. He does come back to India though to continue with his preaching and also to act as a to uh, provide some sort of primitive treatment in his village, but then later goes back abroad. His family continues to stay in England today, and funnily, Arundhati Roy is descended from him. Arundhati Roy and Pranay Roy are descended from this person's family.
Acha. So on the same topic, there is also the example of William Carey. So I remember specifically from his own or from someone else's notes on him that their first convert was basically a person who was who had an accident and was practically, you can say, immobilized since he was a carpenter and so on. And when he converts him, he basically makes him, even the conversion is so dubious in a manner that basically forces him to copy the Bengali words of whatever they have to do during the conversion, right? The desperate man who is basically barely able to speak in his state, they somehow convert him, and the statement he makes that apparently the shackles of Brahmanism have been broken as we have found our first convert
Oh, there are
among the
countless
known
such cases
castes.
when such folks are like they're basically blackmailed into converting, where they are like denied treatment until they convert, or they are allowed to suffer, as we
This was
know
a
Missionaries of
Mother
Charity has done.
Teresa, the
Yes.
Mother Teresa way, basically. So William Carey was doing it 100 and whatever, 180 years before her.
Oh, Mother Teresa was a
Also,
Catholic,
it's
right? So Mother Teresa was a Catholic. So
yeah.
even I mean, it's not that the Catholics didn't have this similar practices going on. So yeah, Protestants were just more
Also, we get
Portuguese
secular.
were like
They
that.
just had more missionary zeal.
Yeah, we also get to say this, right? So, in today's discussion, all of the activities which they engaged in, we are seeing these are all some sort of derivation from their own Bible, like describing native populations who are non-Christians as savages and all, and the motives that they use, like child being thrown into water, again similar to Moloch, child
Their
sacrifice,
imagination is limited to that, basically.
completely. Uh, that burning woman and all of that, those are from the references. I think I may be mistaken, but Gomorrah or some other references in Bible. That's there of killing the woman and so on. Uh, all these things. Uh, Now, even the whole doctor thing,
Yeah,
even that's
they have this
from
entire
Bible.
story. They
So
have this entire story of the Tower of Babel, in which only they speak. I mean, people across the world speak in different languages, and they are very confused, and they follow debased practices, and they've turned away from the way of God. So it is the job of the Christians to bring them back to the
completely.
so-called rightful way,
Hmm.
the righteous ways.
Jesus Jesus is the healer, so the missionary has to be a healer. He needs to project that whole Jesus attitude of being a doctor. So we
He
get
needs
to
to do
see
this
all
for
of
Jesus.
these
Basically,
doctors.
he's filling up for Jesus until Jesus comes back. Like, because they have been promised that
Yeah,
Jesus is going to return. Like, since he has been resurrected, and they have been promised that prior to doomsday, Jesus will be coming back. The time of reckoning is coming. So Jesus will come back, and he will grant them all salvation. And so, in order to, like, this is basically the preparation for salvation. They need to. I mean, this is basically their equivalent of karma. uh, it's not just good deeds, it is how many people they've added to the flock.
Exactly. They
yeah,
were, I mentioned about that, right? They believe that second coming is coming and that there is a tragedy waiting to happen because so many non-converts are there.
Precisely.
This is also the reason, by the way, they wanted to end slavery because they wanted the slaves to be converted to Christianity.
Yes, I mean, that was also, I mean, it was a sort of bargain. They struck a deal that, I mean, those who converted were no longer slaves, they were free. They could start afresh as free people. But until they converted, they were uh, very much kept as slaves. I mean, they went so far as to propose that, I mean, in Africa, they proposed to the natives that the natives deserved to be enslaved since they were descended from one of the sons of Noah who had actually been cursed that his descendants would be slaves, and therefore
Right.
they were manipulated into thinking that this slavery was something their ancestors had brought upon themselves due to their own decisions back then, and therefore they had deserved to be enslaved until, of course, they turned to Christianity.
Also, one interesting thing to note, maybe you both can comment on this. So, the whole debate, right, at the abolitionist versus the Confederacy portion, the ones who were trying to keep the practice of slavery alive, both of them were giving arguments from the very same book that both of them appealed to in their personal life, the Bible. So, one, as you said, the whole Cain and Abel story that was being taken as an example for sustaining slavery as a practice. And the other portion, the abolitionists were quoting from Paul, Paul's, I think, one of the letters, where he says that there is no Jew, no Gentile, no slave, no master. There is only Christ within the there is only Christ within the brotherhood, and so on and so forth. These sort of uh, theological battles were going on and on. Uh, every damn thing is based on this theology, not from any other reason whatsoever, it seems.
And there were a group of people who had, like, I mean, Christianity held this notion that even sinners were granted a place in heaven as long as they trusted in Christ, and as long as they did charity and church work. So as long as they donated towards the church, basically different people sitting across, Europe and America who were like, who may have who may not have had a, a very straightforward life, they were allowed to think that as long as they donated towards the church cause and supported missionaries, salvation was guaranteed. So money just kept coming. It was only when, probably, I mean, spiritual leaders from India went to the West, that the impression about India in the minds of the Europeans and the Americans started changing for the first time. Like people like Swami Vivekanand, Swami Abhedanand, and Mahanamrita Brahmachari and Premananda Baba.
Yes.
It is
And
only when,
ironically, people, even like Theosophical Society and all, were arguing in our favor against these people.
yes,
And even
precisely,
Max Mueller types to some extent.
precisely so. And of course, the missionaries were desperate to ensure that money just kept coming. So they tried every means they could to stop information from India traveling abroad. And there were many agents they had who would keep doing lip service to them. So that is something which we will, of course, bring up in our future discussions.
Yes. So probably the next stream we will be covering Ram Mohan Roy, or maybe that and the entire time where basically utilitarians come up. But yes, broadly we'll be covering Ram Mohan Roy and the, you can say, the other Hindu elites that start popping up, and where we are not, the foreigners are no longer the basically the focus of the presentation from the next stream onwards. So, any last points, Rishi and Nocturnal Patriot? Or we can probably end the stream from here.
I think we're good.
Let me just check for any comments if there are any. So this is there. So you guys are saying that Orientalism was basically soft Christianity. Good question. Essentially, I would like to point out that these people came from the framework that their whole worldview was shaped by Christianity already. Especially, let me take the example of William Jones. So, in his daily reading itself, Sanskrit or reading Hindu manuscripts was a very small part of the day. He, apparently, he used to read 10 chapters of the Bible every day. So essentially, if you read that much, of course, you're going to be very, very influenced by whatever Christianity has to offer. And of course, as we have tried to point out in the last stream, they would try to find references to Christianity and events in their scriptures, in our scriptures, a lot. Especially the example of the flood is there. So yes, that was the answer to this. Any more questions you can see?
I mean, Orientalism even tried to draw parallels between Sri Krishna and Hafiz based on their, I mean, limited
Yes, yes.
knowledge.
This was actually not done by Orientalists. This was done by William Ward. So the missionary, which is even more surprising. But yeah, the missionaries were not thinking independently of the Orientalists. They were all kind of harking back to the same knowledge source. So yes, that was basically our point at, in the whole stream. And we are looking forward to all of your views. Please put a comment in the comment section as to how you found the presentation and stream. So yes, that is all.
And feel free to add any thoughts, and maybe we can cover them in our subsequent podcasts and
Yes,
discussions. We look forward to hearing what you have to say.
absolutely. With that, we shall end our stream now. Any final words, Rishi, or shall I end it here?
No, it's okay. It was an amazing session, and uh, the next one will be also amazing and very surprising to many uh, viewers as well, because too many myths will be broken. We can just guarantee that.
Yes,
So
hopefully
stay
many
tuned for that.
illusions will be shattered. So yeah,
Yeah.
very
Yes,
well then.
because we are going to cover our own elite from the next stream onwards, and our focus will no longer
Yep.
be on the outsiders. So yes, a lot of things to discuss and so on. So
Oh yes,
looking forward to seeing all the viewers again in the next stream. Jai Shri Ram.
Jai Sri Ram.
Jai Shri Ram.